ever wondered why do people love or hate? Obviously, from poets to economists, everyone would agree that depending on how much we love or hate, we decide what to do or what not to do. Yet, economists for decades have not known exactly the answer and therefore have assumed that maybe we can just think it's God-given. And then, given how much we love, we will want to buy more apples. And given whether we love more apples or pears, we will prefer to buy more the one or the other. There are even models which say what will happen with love and hate themselves over time eventually, but they predict that hate will disappear, and it never does. So why do hate and love emerge? This is a question that seems to matter a lot and not to have the answer, or at least not until this recent book, Culture-Based Development by Tubadji. It's a book about a paradigm, culture-based development, that models cultural bias in economic choice and answers this big question, why? According to culture-based development, to love or to hate is a decision. It is a choice made in the market for values. It's the product on the market for values. And there, the individual supplies behavior and the society demands this behavior of loving or hating something. Depending on the personal circumstances, the person commits or not, to a certain degree, to take the valuation recommended by society. And the reason why the person does it, the reason why this market exists, is the gain of certainty, both for the individual and the society. This is the answer that culture-based development provides to the big why question in economics. And that's why CBD is the economics of why. And it's indeed an economic paradigm. The book is divided into two parts. The first is the economic methodology, just like in a public choice sense, applying standard economic tools to understand culture as a complex dynamic entity, as something that emerges on the market for values, but is an amalgam of the different separate attitudes of love and hate on the market for values. It's a whole DNA which divides them into cultural heritage and lived culture parts, but is altogether forming the capital that people have. They get endowed with it, and then they are different according to how much of this capital they possess. Their difference is called cultural distance, but it's just a difference. And this difference can be perceived as something to love or something to hate, depending on the most important notion in culture-based development, which is cultural entropy. Cultural entropy is essentially a measure for the openness of a place. Depending whether the place is open or closed to difference, they will either love the cultural distance that the person possesses or will hate this same distance. And so the cultural bias emerges as an interaction between the cultural distance and the cultural entropy, the cultural distance between places and the cultural entropy of the place. This methodological approach, which has a sound economic fundament and in the same time is really original in its methodological approach to interaction between individual and place, is then applied in order to understand some very important direct effects of the cultural bias created in economic behavior. For instance, an immigrant decides whether to go to a particular place or not, depending on the distance that he has with the place and whether the distance would be loved or hated, obviously. Then there are indirect effects. They're called cultural frictions, and they're essentially the chain rule applied on cultural gravity standing behind spatial frictions in the causal chain of events. And both effects are observed, direct and indirect, when culture varies, the cultural entropy specific varies between 0 and 1. But there are extreme cases when cultural entropy can be zero, and they're the most dramatic ones because they have direct impact on the interaction between individuals, the altruistic attitude and the cooperation between people can completely dissolve. And this can be shown with the Edgeworth box methodology in economics. Then indirectly for the society, this means something even more destabilizing. It means chaos and actually the great transformation, which means revolution rather than evolution. And all these applications of culture-based development demonstrate that the beyond good and evil approach that Nietzsche has can be done also in economics. We can understand that nothing is intrinsically good or bad, lovable or hateable. People determine whether to love or hate things according to their individual circumstances. That's why we can intervene into the circumstances so that we facilitate people to have the loving attitude that is the one which enables flourishing and enables evolution rather than requiring revolution. Now, why this book matters? Because methodologically it approaches culture more successfully than most other existing comparable paradigms. Most people interested in culture would take one proxy and actually will pride in taking a very interesting and different, never used before proxy, historical one, which will demonstrate that culture matters. But we all know as economists and academics that if an entity matters in the model, if we under-quantify it, then the model is biased. And it's exactly what most approximations of culture by just one single variable do. They under-quantify culture. Unlike that, culture-based development has a very well-established methodological approach that ensures the comprehensive measurement of the meaningful variation, the complex entity culture. Also, policymakers will benefit from the book because the book finishes in every chapter with explanation how this particular principle of culture-based development is relevant to aesthetic education. To use culture not as a Machiavellian or paternalistic manipulative tool for society, but rather as a way to ensure the human development of people and the ability of the individuals to achieve mental resilience, which is actually healthy both for the individual and for the society. This is an opportunity that can be done by policymakers that can perceive the previously labeled disease of the arts as a blessing in disguise. This is a field which is can very fast and successful achieve the interventions that they want. This is also a book that will enable and empower practitioners in culture because it will give them a tool to quantify their impact on society, not only in terms of how many sales they do, because this is not their main impact. Their main impact is that they influence, that they inspire the whole world in its behavior. And last but not least, students can benefit very much from the book. While the chapters of the book are each dealing with a particular founding principle of CBD, and the structure is first focused on explaining the principle theoretically, and then giving the empirical papers, summary of the empirical work of CBD, based on which the principle was deduced. Now, every chapter also finishes with the summary of the relevant literature of other alternative paradigms, which handle the same question in their own different ways. In this way, a student can not only get very well introduced to the founding principles of CBD, but also will be helped to position it within the existing cultural economics literature and actually understand the literature itself. And ultimately, the book matters because it provides a unified methodological approach, foundation for studying in a comparable manner the fluctuations in the socioeconomic development in what sense? We can have some discrimination in every interaction, in every transaction in normal society, normally functioning society. But there might be more excessive cases of hate crime. And then there can be also polarization between groups of people that creates much more tension and frustrates the development of the place much more. And then ultimately, the tension can escalate so much that the system can fail. So in order to monitor all this process and ensure your intervention into the crucial cultural capital that can prevent the system failure, prevent the polarization, avoid the hate crime, minimize the discrimination in such a way that it will ensure the place will maintain the necessary cultural entropy for itself to flourish sustainably over time. This is the value added that the culture-based development does, both for academics and policymakers the same. And that's why also academics from very different backgrounds have endorsed the book. Both Professor David Ulrich, who is a regional economist and innovation interested person from Indiana University, and also Professor Corrado Benassi from Bologna University, who is a microeconomist. Converge in understanding this book as interesting and going to a new place where nobody else has yet ventured. Now, if you're curious to know more about the book yourself, you can obtain the book from the publisher, Edward Elder, a wonderful publishing house. And also, you can explore more on the website about culture-based development maintained by the author, where you can have information about the future launch events. At the launch events, you will have special discounts for the book. Also, if you're a student, you can have a special opportunity to obtain the book in a different manner. So do not hesitate to check the website. And above all, gain proficiency in culture-based development and a lot more.